The wrought iron gates of Harlance's estate were less a welcome than a warning. They slid open with a silent, hydraulic hiss, revealing a driveway that snaked through a manicured forest toward a house of glass and stone. "Remember," Wissoff muttered, gripping the steering wheel of their borrowed, sputtering car. He glanced at his sister, his eyes wide with a desperate, theatrical urgency. "You're fragile, a delicate flower crushed by the cruel heel of fate. Lean on me when you walk. Try to look a little pale." Yasmin Tanner stared at her reflection in the side mirror. Pale was easy. She hadn't slept in days. The rest was a bitter pill to swallow. She, who had chaired charity galas and navigated boardrooms with effortless grace, was now being coached to play the part of a damsel in distress. But with every asset frozen and their family name dragged through the mud, pride was a luxury she could no longer afford. They were met at the door not by a butler, but by Harlan Sear himself. He stood framed in the massive doorway, a figure of sharp angles and expensive tailoring. His face was a mask of cool indifference, his dark eyes betraying nothing. "Harlan," Wissoff began, his voice booming with manufactured outrage as he supported Yasmin's arm. "Look what you've done. Look at her. My sister. Homeless. Because of your family's predatory tactics." Harlan's gaze flickered from Wissoff's accusatory face to Yasmin's downcast one. "Your family's bankruptcy is a consequence of your father's reckless investments, Wissoff. It has nothing to do with me." His voice was calm, level, and utterly dismissive. "We have nowhere to go," Wissoff pressed, his voice cracking. "Our homes, our accounts eased. Would you cast her out onto the street? Is that the kind of man you are?" Yasmin hated this. She hated the pleading in her brother's voice, the lie he was spinning. A way Harlan looked at her as if she were a piece of unfortunate collateral damage. Yet, as Wissoff painted a bleak picture of shelters and destitution, a cold knot of genuine fear tightened in her stomach. This performance was all they had left. She allowed a slight tremble to run through her hand where it rested on Wissoff's arm. Harlan's jaw tensed. He studied Yasmin for a long, silent moment. She didn't meet his eyes, focusing instead on the impeccable veining in the marble floor. He saw the faint purple smudges under her eyes, the proud set of her shoulders that fought against the faint slum. After an eternity, he let out a quiet, weary sigh. "Fine," he said. The word clipped. "She can stay." Temporarily, relief, sharp and dizzying, washed over Yasmin, but it was immediately chilled by Harlan's next words as he stepped aside to let her in, pointedly ignoring Wissoff. Once her brother had made a hasty exit, promising to return, Harlan turned to her in the cavernous living room. "Let's be clear, Ms. Tanner," he stated, his voice devoid of any warmth. "You are a guest, nothing more. This arrangement is not intimate." The implication hung in the air, stark and humiliating. Yasmin flinched, her cheeks burning. Of course, he thought she was here to leverage their family's long-standing rivalry into something else. Something sordid. He disliked her on principle. The sheer scale of the room, with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a city glittering with lights that were no longer hers, suddenly felt suffocating. The reality of her loss, her home, her future, her dignity crashed down on her all at once. A single, hot tear escaped and slid down her cheek, then another. She tried to stifle a sob, turning away from him, mortified by her own weakness. "Are you crying?" Harlan's voice was laced with an unfamiliar note of alarm. He sounded genuinely thrown, as if a spreadsheet had suddenly burst into song. He took a hesitant step closer. "My apologies," he said, the words stiff and awkward. "Was I too harsh?" wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. Yasmin shook her head, forcing a watery smile. The apology, however clumsy, was the first shred of kindness she'd received all day. "No, not at all," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm just beyond grateful." The polished black surface of the grand piano reflected a distorted, flickering version of Yasmin, a ghost in a gilded cage. Here, at Celeste, she was no one just the hands that coaxed melancholic melodies from the ivory keys, a living soundtrack for the clinking of champagne flutes and murmured conversations of the city's elite. For a few hours each night, the music was her shield, a fragile barrier against the biting reality of her new life. But tonight, the shield was about to shatter. Well, if it isn't Yasmin Tanner. The voice, slick with condescension, sliced through her concentration. Finley Vance, a man whose advances she had once dismissed with a cool smile, stood before her, flanked by two sycophantic friends. Their expensive suits reeked of entitlement and whiskey. "I almost didn't recognize you without a family fortune to hide behind." One of his friends snickered, Yasmin's fingers stilled on the keys. She kept her gaze fixed on the sheet music, her posture ramrod straight. "Finley, please, I'm working." Finley laughed, a coarse, ugly sound that drew glances from nearby tables. He leaned over the piano, invading her space. "This is what the great Yasmin Tanner calls working now. Playing background music for people you used to consider beneath you." He pulled a thick wad of cash from his pocket and fanned it out. "I'll give you 1,000 to play something just for me. Something cheerful. For a change." Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of shame and fury. This was more than mockery. It was a public execution of her pride. Every fiber of her being screamed to slap him, to walk away. But the image of an empty refrigerator and the looming rent payment held her captive. She needed the money. She hated that she needed it. She swallowed the acidic taste of humiliation. When she finally looked at him, her eyes were devoid of all warmth. "My price is 500,000. The demand hung in the air, audacious and desperate. Finley's friends guffawed, but Finley's smirk only widened. He saw right through her. He saw the corner she was backed into. 500,000. He tutted, shaking his head in mock pity. "You know, I almost preferred your arrogant attitude before. At least then you had some value. Now you're just cheap." The word struck her with the force of a physical blow. Her composure finally cracked, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. Before she could react, the heavy oak doors of the restaurant swung open, admitting a gust of cold night air and a presence that instantly commanded the room. Harlan Sear stood silhouetted in the entrance, his gaze sweeping the dining room with an unnerving intensity. The ambient chatter dwindled to a hushed silence. His eyes found Yasmin, then locked onto Finley, whose hand was now closing around her arm. Emboldened by alcohol and ignorance, Finley tightened his grip, his fingers digging into her flesh. "Don't you dare walk away from me," he hissed, his face inches from hers. Panic, sharp and blinding, seized her. There was only one escape, one name that held enough power to stop this. "Let go of me," she gasped, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry in the sudden stillness. "I belong to Harlan now." It was a lie born of desperation, a gamble of her last remaining chip. Harlan's expression, already severe, hardened into something glacial. He moved with a silent, predatory grace, each step deliberate as he closed the distance. The air crackled with menace. When he stopped beside them, his voice was deceptively soft, yet it carried the weight of a death sentence. "Who?" he asked, his eyes never leaving Finley's hand on Yasmin's arm. "Dared to harm her." Finley's drunken bravado evaporated, replaced by dawning, sober terror. He snatched his hand back as if burned. Yasmin scrambled from the piano bench and moved behind Harlan, her small hand clutching the back of his impeccable suit jacket. The fabric was cool and solid beneath her trembling fingers. Tears streamed freely now, a mix of relief and residual shame. "Harlan," she whispered, her voice breaking. He bullied me. He humiliated me. Please get revenge for me. By asking, she cemented her claim. She had tied her fate to his. Harlan didn't look at her. His cold gaze remained fixed on Finley. You had her, he stated. He turned to Finley and his cowering friends. Slap yourselves. Until she is satisfied. A wave of disbelief rippled through the onlookers. Finley stared aghast. What? You can't. Do it, Harlan commanded, his voice dropping to a low, chilling register. Or I will dismantle your father's company brick by brick before sunrise. The sharp, sickening sound of flesh hitting flesh echoed in the silent restaurant. One by one, Finley and his friends began to slap their own faces, the blows starting tentatively and growing harder under Harlan's unblinking stare. They continued for what felt like an eternity, their faces turning red and puffy, until Yasmin finally whispered, "Stop." Harlan leaned in close to Finley, his final words a venomous promise. If you ever look at her, speak to her, or even think her name again, I will ensure your family disappears from this city. Am I understood? Finley, utterly broken, could only nod numbly. The ride back to the villa was a silent, suffocating affair. Once inside the sterile, modern foyer, Harlan turned on her, his anger finally finding its target. A pianist, you were so desperate for money you were willing to secretly debase yourself in a restaurant. His voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp with a fury that felt oddly like concern. Why didn't you tell me? Before she could form a reply, a sharp, stabbing pain erupted in her stomach. Yasmin gasped, clutching her midsection as she doubled over. The color drained from her face. Yasmin, Harlan's anger vanished, replaced instantly by alarm. He was at her side into strides, scooping her into his arms. What is it? What's wrong? The hospital visit was a blur of fluorescent lights and antiseptic smells. The diagnosis was as swift as it was mortifying. Acute gastroenteritis, caused by ingesting unsanitary food. The doctor explained calmly. Street food, most likely. Harlan's jaw tightened. He had been lecturing her about pride while she was subsisting on food that made her sick. His exasperation was palpable. From now on, a new family rule, he declared, his tone leaving no room for argument. You are forbidden from eating any unverified outside food. It was another restriction, another layer of control. Yet all Yasmin could feel was a strange warmth spreading through her chest. He cared. Beneath the scolding and the cold authority, he was worried about her. Please, she pleaded softly, her energy spent. Don't tell my brother. Wisif has enough to worrying about. Harlan studied her pale, exhausted face. He saw her fierce loyalty, a stubborn refusal to be a burden. A long moment passed before he finally spoke, his voice clipped and decisive. You won't have to worry about money anymore. Starting tomorrow, you will work as my personal assistant at Sear Group. Your salary will be $20,000 a month. Yasmin's eyes widened, filling with fresh tears not of humiliation or pain, but of profound, overwhelming gratitude. He wasn't just offering her a job. He was offering her dignity. He was giving her a lifeline, pulling her from the wreckage of her life at his own hands. In that moment, the cold, intimidating CEO was gone, and all she could see was her unlikely, severe, and undeniable savior. The list Harlan's male secretary had handed her was concise. White South Sea pearl necklace, 14mm plus, round, flawless. Budget, $50,000. The unspoken part of the memo was that it had to be a gift fit for a woman of discerning taste. Yasmin felt a familiar, bitter pang. A year ago, she would have known exactly who in Harlan's circle was deserving of such a gift. Now, she was just the errand girl. Does Mr. Sear entertain often? She asked the secretary, feigning casual interest as she collected the corporate credit card. He looked up from his monitor, his expression neutral. Mr. C leads a very clean life. Not a single woman around him. Besides his niece, Sheila, and, well, you. The information settled in Yasmin's mind, clicking into place. Sheila. The necklace was for a child. A $50,000 piece of jewelry for a 7-year-old was obscene. But it was exactly the kind of detached, extravagant gesture Harlan would make. Armed with this insight, Yasmin bypassed the ostentatious, diamond-encrusted options at the city's most exclusive jeweler. She chose a simple, elegant strand of luminous white pearls on a delicate platinum chain. It was timeless, beautiful, and cost just under $40,000. The slight profit she made for his budget was a small, private victory. Back in his penthouse office, Harlan examined the velvet box with an inscrutable gaze. Open it, Yasmin did, revealing the soft gleam of the pearls against the dark lining. He grunted, a sound that could have meant anything from approval to disdain. Try it on me, she asked, startled. I need to see how it sits. He gestured impatiently. With hesitant fingers, Yasmin lifted the necklace and turned her back to him, lifting her hair. She felt his presence behind her, a solid wall of warmth that made the air feel thin. His large, usually decisive hands fumbled with the tiny clasp. The brush of his knuckles against her nape sent a shiver straight down her spine. He was too close, his breath ghosting over her ear. Hold still, he murmured, his voice a low vibration that seemed to travel through her skin. When the clasp finally clicked shut, he didn't step away. He rested his hands lightly on her shoulders, his gaze meeting hers in the reflective sheen of the floor-to-ceiling window. The pearls felt cool against her heated skin. Just then, the office door swung open and Sheila bounded in, followed by a gracefully aging woman who had Harlan's sharp eyes. Uncle Harlan, look what I drew. Sheila stopped short, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. Auntie Yasmin, you look like a princess. Yasmin's blood ran cold. Auntie Yasmin. She glanced at Harlan, whose expression remained unreadable, his hands still resting on her shoulders. The older woman smiled warmly. She's right, Harlan. The two of you look well suited. The necklace is perfect on her. Yasmin quickly unclasped the necklace, her hands trembling as she placed it back in its box. The illusion was broken. Later that day, she found Harlan alone, reviewing a financial report. Mr. Sear, she began, her voice tight. About what happened earlier, I need to be clear. Our arrangement is purely financial. I have no ulterior motives. He didn't look up from his papers. I understand, he said, his tone flat. The simple agreement felt like a dismissal, leaving her feeling strangely empty and more confused than ever. The next evening, seeking a glass of water, she wandered past the house's private gym. The door was ajar. Through the gap, she saw him. Harlan was on a workout bench, a thin black tank top clinging to the damp, sculpted planes of his chest and abdomen. His powerful arms strained as he lifted a heavy dumbbell, muscles coiling and uncoiling under his skin. He was a portrait of disciplined strength, sweat glistening on his temples. Yasmin froze, mesmerized. For the first time, she wasn't seeing the cold CEO or her brother's rival. She was seeing a man, and he was breathtaking. As she tried to retreat unnoticed, her hip brushed against a rack of weights, sending a metallic clatter through the quiet room. Harlan sat up, turning his head. His eyes, dark and intense, found hers. She felt a blush creep up her neck, a mortifying heat. Scrambling to move away, her foot caught on the edge of a mat. She stumbled forward, her hands flying out to brace herself against his chest. The contact was electric. His skin was hot, damp and impossibly solid beneath her palms. A gasp escaped her lips, and her legs suddenly felt like overcooked noodles. The raw, masculine scent of him, clean sweat, and something uniquely his own filled her senses. He steadied her easily, his hands closing around her upper arms. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You lack exercise," he observed, his voice a low, playful rumble. "Tennis. Tomorrow morning, 7:00 a.m. It wasn't a request. The next day on his private court. The morning sun was already warm. Yasmin, a decent player in her former life, was hopelessly outmatched. Harlan moved with a fluid, predatory grace. It serves like bullets. Within 20 minutes, her lungs were burning and her legs were shaking with fatigue. Chasing a particularly brutal shot, her vision swam. She collapsed onto the cool green court, dizzy and gasping for air. Instantly, he was at her side, kneeling, a bottle of water in his hand. "Drink," he commanded softly. He helped her take a few sips before gently pushing her back until she was lying flat. "Just rest." He sat beside her, a silent, watchful guardian. The intensity of his concern was a tangible thing. Feeling cherished and strangely safe, a reckless bubble of honesty rose in her throat. "Do you like me?" she asked, her voice breathy, trying to frame the monumental question as a joke. He looked down at her, his expression uncharacteristically serious. The playful glint was gone, replaced by a profound stillness. He didn't speak for a long moment, then gave a single, soft hum of affirmation. It wasn't a word, but it was everything, a confession, a truth laid bare between them. Panic seized her. This was too much, too fast. She scrambled to her feet, her heart hammering against her ribs. "I have to go," she mumbled, not looking at him, and fled the court. That night, she couldn't face him. She couldn't stay in that house, breathing the same air that was now thick with his unspoken declaration. She called Wissoff and sought refuge in his cramped, shared apartment, her mind replaying that single, resonant sound over and over. The day of the auction arrived like a death sentence. The Grand Hall, a place she'd once attended for charity galas, now felt like a courtroom where her family's legacy was on trial. She and Wissoff sat in the middle rows, their faces pale and etched with sorrow. Every carved mahogany panel and crystal chandelier of the Villa Tanner was seared into her memory. Before the bidding began, a shadow fell over them. Finley. He slid into the seat beside Yasmin, his cologne cawing and aggressive. "A tragedy, isn't it?" he said, his voice a smug purr. "But I can help. I've spoken to a few people. I can make sure the bidding stays reasonable. All you have to do is agree to have dinner with me." Publicly, Wissoff stiffened beside her. "Get away from her. Listen, Tanner." Finley sneered, his gaze fixed on Yasmin. "Your pride is worthless. I'm offering your sister a lifeline. She can align with me, or your precious family home can sell for pennies on the dollar. The choice is hers." Wissoff's voice was low and shaking with rage. "I would rather be destitute than sell my sister to a snake like you." Finley just chuckled and retreated to his seat in the front row, confident in his power. He was right. As the auctioneer began, the bids were pathetic. The starting price was a fraction of the villa's value, and the increments were insultingly small. Finley's cronies were placing token bids, scaring off illegitimate buyers. A wave of cold despair washed over Yasmin. Her home, her memories, were being bartered away for nothing while their tormentor watched with a satisfied smirk. The bidding stalled. The auctioneer's gavel hovered. Going once, going twice, Finley turned in his seat, his eyes locking with Yasmin's. He mouthed the words, "Last chance." Tears pricked her eyes. Desperation clawed at her throat. For a fleeting, horrifying second, she considered it. She would sacrifice herself for her family's legacy. "Sold to 100 million. The voice was not loud, but it cut through the murmuring hall with the chilling authority of a blade. It came from the back, near the entrance. Every head in the room swiveled, Standing in the arched doorway, silhouetted against the bright afternoon light, was Harlan Sear. He was dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit, his expression calm, his eyes fixed only on her. He paid no attention to the gasps of the crowd or Finley's shocked, ashen face. The auctioneer, flustered, stammered, "I have a bid for $100 million. Do I have any other bids?" Silence. Finley looked as if he'd been struck by lightning. The hall was utterly still. Going once. Going twice. Sold. For $100 million to the gentleman in the back. The gavel fell with a deafening crack. It was over. As the crowd erupted into a buzz of whispers, Harlan began to walk down the aisle. He moved with unhurried purpose, his path straight and true, his gaze never leaving Yasmin. He walked past Finley without a flicker of acknowledgement. He walked past the rows of stunned onlookers. He stopped directly in front of her, in front of the seat Finley had occupied just moments before. He looked down at her tear-streaked face, his own expression softening with a tenderness she had never seen. He held out his hand. After a stunned moment, she placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was warm and firm, a silent promise. "Let's go home," Harlan Sear said. The auctioneer's voice was a flat, indifferent drone. Going once, going twice. Yasmin felt the air leave her lungs. Beside her, Wasef's jaw was a granite knot of fury and helplessness. Across the hall, Finley Northcote smirked. His victory, so close he could taste it. He was about to acquire the Tanner family villa, their history, their memories for a pittance. The final nail in their coffin. The polished cherrywood gavel lifted, a hangman's tool posed to execute their legacy. $300 million. The voice was not a shout, but it commanded the room with the force of a thunderclap. It came from the shadowed alcove at the back, deep and resonant, slicing through the stale air. A collective gasp rippled through the hall. Heads swiveled, murmuring, erupting like a brush fire. $300 million was an absurdity. A number so far beyond the villa's market value it bordered on madness. Yasmin and Wasef stared. Mount Agape, their despair vaporized by sheer, stupefying shock. Hope, wild and confusing, flooded the void. Who would do this? Who would pay 3 times the price for a property tangled in bankruptcy? Finley's smug expression had shattered, replaced by a mask of contorted rage. His meticulously laid trap had just been obliterated by a ghost with an infinite checkbook. The auctioneer, flustered for the first time, blinked at the back of the room. $300 million. Do I have confirmation? You do, the voice affirmed, devoid of emotion. The gavel came down with a sharp, definitive crack. Sold to the anonymous bidder in the rear. As the room buzzed with frantic speculation, Yasmin's mind raced. To voice it was familiar, not in its words, but in its cadence, its cold, unwavering authority. A phantom suspicion, too wild to be true, pricked at her consciousness. She scanned the dispersing crowd, but the figure in the alcove had already melted away. Outside, a man in a tailored suit spoke quietly into his phone, his back to the chaos. "It's done, Mr. Sear. The acquisition is complete. As instructed, your name was not mentioned." He hung up and slipped into a waiting black sedan, leaving no trace. A week later, Yasmin stood in the glittering ballroom of the Orion Hotel, a glass of champagne in her hand, feeling like a foreign object. The party was for her childhood friend, Angus, back in town after years abroad. For a few hours, she wanted to feel normal, to pretend the world wasn't a precarious ledge. It didn't last. A trio of women former friends whose loyalty had evaporated with the Tanner fortune glided over, their smiles as sharp as broken glass. "Yasmin, darling," said a woman named Chloe, a voice dripping with pity. "We heard about your troubles. It's just dreadful. We all chipped in a little something to help you out." She held out a thick envelope, the gesture a public performance of charity designed for maximum humiliation. Wisif tense beside her, ready to intervene. But Yasmin placed a calming hand on his arm. The old Yasmin would have shrunk away, burned by the shame. This Yasmin smiled, a brilliant, blindingly sweet smile. Chloe, that is so incredibly thoughtful of you, she gushed, taking the envelope with genuine enthusiasm. She peeked inside at the wad of cash. Wow, is this all? I mean, it's a wonderful start. But every little bit helps when you're rebuilding an empire. You know. She turned to the other two women, eyes wide and expectant. Do you have your payment QR codes? It's just so much faster than cash these days. The women froze, their malicious plan backfiring spectacularly. They had expected tears, a retreat. They were not prepared for shameless, cheerful acceptance. Cornered by their own theatrical generosity, they fumbled for their phones, their faces flushing with embarrassment as they reluctantly transferred funds under Yasmin's watchful gaze. Just then, Angus appeared, his expression thunderous. What's going on here? He demanded. He saw the phones, understood the scene in an instant, and his face darkened. Get out, he said, his voice low and dangerous. All of you. My party has no room for vultures. He then turned to Yasmin, his eyes soft with concern. But she just squeezed his hand. Don't worry about me, she said, her voice clear and strong enough for the lingering onlookers to hear. She looked at Chloe's retreating back. And tell your fathers to enjoy their market positions while they can. My brother will rise again, and when he does, he won't forget you stood by us and you kicked us when we were down. Later that night, back in Ulsef's cramped apartment, Yasmin laid out the cash from the party and the funds from her new part-time job on the coffee table. It's not much, she said, sorting the bills, but it's a start. Wisif watched her, a mix of pride and worrying in his eyes. You were incredible tonight, he said. But yours that stunt at the auction, it had to be Haaland. Yasmin didn't look up. We don't know that. Who else has that kind of money and a reason to stay anonymous? He pressed, his dislike for Haaland a raw nerve. Just be careful. What kind of man are you even looking for anyway? The question caught her off guard. She shrugged, feigning indifference. I don't know. Someone warm, funny, definitely not the cold, old-fashioned type like Haaland Sear. But as she said it, a pang of wistfulness struck her. He had saved her family home, protected her from Finley. Yet he hadn't even called to check on her after she'd stayed over. He acted through proxies and checkbooks, a ghost providing shelter, but never warm. It was that personal distance that hurt more than she cared to admit. The next day, she was scrolling through her phone with a friend from work who was obsessed with a popular online streamer. You have to see this guy, her friend said, pushing her phone into Yasmin's hands. He's called Fish. He never shows his face, but his dance videos are insane. And his physique, my God. On the screen, a man with a lean, powerfully sculpted back moved with fluid, mesmerizing grace in a dimly lit studio. He wore a simple black mask that covered the upper half of his face. At the line of his jaw, the breadth of his shoulders, it was all disturbingly familiar. He spun, and for a split second, the light caught the defined muscles of his abdomen, a physique identical to the one she'd glimpsed on Haaland that morning he'd emerged from the shower. The streamer's movements were passionate, artistic, and utterly captivating, a stark contrast to the CEO's rigid, icy demeanor. Yasmin's breath hitched. She watched again, her eyes tracing the way his hands moved. A confident posture, the controlled power in every step. It couldn't be. The cold, calculating man who ran Serenity Corp and the anonymous, sensual dancer who captivated millions online. But the more she watched, the more the pieces clicked into place. The secrecy, the disciplined physique, the faint, almost imperceptible turn of his head that was so uniquely him. A dizzying, impossible realization bloomed in her chest. Harlan Sear wasn't just the old-fashioned CEO she thought she knew. He was a man of profound, hidden depths, and she was, quite suddenly, falling for both sides of him.